Hi, everybody. I'm here to talk about how to apply science and rationality and a little bit of bathe to your emotions. I think a lot of people, when you read about happiness, they start off by talking about, just regular self-help stuff, and that is helpful. That there's definitely something to that. But applying science and reason will get you really good results as well. So this is something to complement all the other things like meditation or cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that. So to start off with, basically, you can just use the way science usually works, which is you generate hypotheses, get data, and then try and rule out those hypotheses. The first thing about generating hypotheses is crucial, and you probably don't even notice that you have hypotheses. You just think that they are the reasons why you're feeling a certain way. So if you're feeling angry at somebody, it's because they did something wrong. It's very obvious. However, that should just be your first hypothesis. Hypothesis one: this person is annoying and they did something annoying. Then you should generate at least three others. So it could be you got bad sleep. It could be that you're vitamin D deficient or iron deficient. It could be that you have these background assumptions about how people should act, and actually this is totally out of whack with or what are realistic expectations of how humans should be. There are so many things that could be causing it, and if I could just give one piece of advice for honestly everything, it's come up with multiple hypotheses or multiple options. So when you're problem solving, most often people will just come up with one potential solution. And if it doesn't work, they're like, well, I guess it didn't work. And it's like, well, yeah, it's complicated. It's going to take a bit longer than just coming up with one idea. And so make sure you come up with multiple hypotheses. The next thing is put probabilities on those. So, it might be that the person's annoying, but when you really think about it, it's going to be like, oh, that's like a 10% chance. And actually, my diet is really terrible. And, that's probably going to cause a lot of things. And when I think about it, actually, I'm grumpy a lot of the time, not just when this person's around. The next thing you want to do after you put probabilities on things is see if there's anything you can do to quickly rule out a lot of things. Because there's a million hypotheses you can test. You only have so much time and resources. So make sure that you pick something that's really quick and easy. The first things that are the most easy to do are quick, like just retroactively thinking about data you have. So for example, with the annoying person, think throughout the rest of the day, was I grumpy? Was I grumpy before? Right? I talked to this person because a lot of times if you think about it, you're like, oh, actually for an hour beforehand, I was feeling a bit irritable, even though nothing was really triggering it. And then when this person came, that's when I started expressing it. A lot of the times people will notice their irritability only when they're interacting with other people, because that's when it actually comes out. Whereas if you're just at your computer and you're not really talking to anybody, then what can happen is, you're feeling irritable, but it doesn't express, so it's not as obvious to your consciousness that that's how you're feeling. So thought experiments are often really good. Well, these aren't quite thought experiments. It's thinking about retroactive data. Actually, a really good technique is thinking like, when did this emotion start? This is super key because you'll often find that it actually started happening before the trigger. And this will give you a whole bunch of information about how to solve this. It's like a mystery to solve as opposed to this completely, unexplainable supernatural phenomenon or something. I do think that people overestimate how much you can actually come to understand your emotions. They're ridiculously complicated. Human brains are just dumb in how complicated they are. And we like to think that we're experts because obviously we live in our own brains, but that is not how it works. So you have generated multiple hypotheses, you put probabilities on them, and you started to try and rule out the big ones. The next thing to do is gather data. So one of the things I love to do is put everything into spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are amazing, and you can do this with your emotions. So the thing that I do is every morning when I wake up, I fill out a whole bunch of data about the previous day. The reason I do this in the morning instead of night is because I have much more control over my routine in the morning, whereas in the evenings, there's all sorts of variables that come up. What if I stay out late with somebody? What if I'm feeling ridiculously tired? I have no energy at night. So doing the spreadsheet just isn't going to happen. But if you can do it on the same day, that's fantastic. But so what I do is I fill out how is the feeling from an emotional perspective, and then I also put life satisfaction because these are two separate things. Your emotions in the day could be very happy, but your life satisfaction could be very poor. So, for example, say you did a whole bunch of drugs the day before and you were feeling great, but the reason you were doing drugs is because your life is miserable. You might put 9 out of 10 on your happiness scale, but then, a 4 out of 10 on life satisfaction, or vice versa. So those are both good things to track. And you can track a million different things. The things that have stayed constant for me are emotions and productivity, but you can track a bunch of things like whether you're taking your vitamins, how many social hours you've had, how many hours of work you did, how many hours you spent outside. There's a million things that you can do. And so what you want to do is track your happiness and your emotions, and then also track things that are contributing to your hypotheses. So maybe you have a hypothesis that you're vitamin D deficient, and that's affecting your mood and your energy levels and stuff like that. So what you can do is start tracking your vitamin D intake, and then see if your mood changes over time. Important thing to keep in mind with vitamins is obviously it can take a while for effects to kick in, but taking that into account, whatever it is. For example, in the past, one thing for me was I was depressed, and I was trying to figure out why. So I tracked all my emotions, and one of my hypotheses was social interaction. How many hours of social interaction did I get? And I found that after tracking it for a bit, sure enough, if I talked to people, I was happier. However, I decided to dig deeper into it. And what I found was actually, it's not just because I was looking at it and I saw, oh, some days I socialize a lot, but I'm still quite unhappy throughout most of the day. What's happening there? And so I started tracking how much I talked to people throughout the day. And what I discovered is that I am with social interactions a lot like with food, where I can't just save it all for the evening and then eat then. I have to eat at spaced intervals. So I made sure then to always make sure to talk to somebody in the morning. And that was like a huge thing, got me out of depression. Fantastic. This isn't something that's going to show up in, cognitive behavioral therapy or meditation and everything. Once again, not saying that those are bad. I love like tons of the psychotherapies and meditation techniques. It's just that you need to approach emotions very much like that you have all this information that general advice won't have. And so what you want to do is come up with a model of how your emotions are working and then test that. Because also, as everybody knows with models, well, not everybody, but all models are wrong because they're trying to simplify how the world works. And if you are simplifying, you are taking out important information. So, but on the flip side, then you can actually use the models because they are actually condensing information as opposed to it would take forever to actually model things as they actually are. In fact, then you would just be where you're at, which doesn't actually help you. So track your things, test them, and then you can also dig deeper to get a better sense of that particular thing. And what else do we have here? The other thing that's really important is not just to track numbers. Numbers are great, obviously. We're talking about how to apply science and Bayes to emotions. So obviously, I'm very pro numbers. However, you're going to miss out a lot if you don't also put in some qualitative information. So in my spreadsheet, what I do is I track a whole bunch of things with numbers, but then I also have a notes section where basically I just describe what happened in the day, particularly things that I think are going to be relevant for future stuff. So I'll mark in big letters and I'll highlight it in like some god awful fuchsia color that a big change happened that day. So for example, I halved my caffeine content, and sure enough, for the next few days I was really grumpy, or I moved to a different country, or that sort of stuff. So what you do with that is, and then I put in a whole bunch of random information. So it's almost like a diary. You can call it like a spreadsheet diary, which is the best. Then you can feel extra nerdy. So what you do is you track all these other things, and then you can go back. And when you go back, you actually know what was happening around that time, so you can come up with better hypotheses. For example, once the caffeine example is spot on because once in the past, I was feeling really discouraged about work. I was thinking, this is too hard. I can't do this. I don't like this. I'm going to give up and become a ski bum somewhere. And then I decided to look back at my data and see when this had started because I had been keeping track of all these things. I could go back and see it had started about 2 months ago. And that turned out to be the time that I gave up caffeine entirely. Now, everyone on the internet says that after a week you get rid of withdrawal symptoms, but a quick Google search found that some people find that after they give up caffeine, they were never the same even years later. I realized that I cared more about my job and doing good work. I work in the NGO sector, so I really think it's important. Then I care about giving up caffeine. So I decided that I'm going to be a caffeine addicted NGO worker rather than a caffeine free ski bum. But the thing is I wouldn't have been able to figure that out if I only had the numbers, right? Because I didn't have at the time the idea that caffeine was so very important to me. I really like to think that wasn't the case, but there you go. And so keeping track of those things makes it so that you can come up with hypotheses retroactively. Now, I know that this is not how scientists are supposed to work, and that's great in academia, or I mean, it's questionable, but whatever. But when you're working with yourself, you only have one piece of data, which is you. Unfortunately, you can't do a randomized control trial, especially blinded. That's very. I mean, you definitely can, but there are just so many competing variables that would just take forever, and we just don't have the time. And this can really get you way better than zero information for much less cost than doing like proper science. So this is why I think that it's really important to do these things. And unfortunately, you can't just use the science out there on psychology because, for one thing, it operates on averages. So it's saying on average, this is what people do. And then another problem with averages is that there's a lot of different kind of ways data can show an average. So say, for example, take the randomized control trial showing that if you tell people about one victim, people will give more money than if you tell them about 10 victims. By victims, I mean people like who need some help. So for example, there's been a natural catastrophe and they need some support or whatever in terms of food and water and shelter and stuff like that. Now, it could be that every single person gives, $1 when it's one person, and they give about $1.10 and 10 cents if it's 10 people or something like that, right? Or even 90 cents, right? Or it could be that most people continue to give $1, and there's just out of 100 people, there's 10 people who give 50 cents to. I'm making up math here. I'm sure it doesn't math out properly, but anyways, you get the idea. Where it could be that actually most people still give the same amount for that group, and some people just give less. Or it could be actually that some people give $10 for 10 people and $1 for one person, but there's so many people, and that's just like 2 out of 100. But then 98 of 100 give way less, or the same amount given even if it's 10 times more. So you could very easily be that 2 in 100. 2 in 100 is actually not that uncommon if you think about your graduating class or something. Take a moment to think about how strange you are. You're probably strange if you're watching this. I say that as an absolute compliment. And you can you imagine that you're actually one of those people who would act very strangely compared to other people? You're the sort of person who would just use the math. Probably. And that's true for basically most of psychological research is that falls into this pattern of just looking at averages. This is very good if you're a politician and you're making policies and you're trying to design policies for millions of people because then you are dealing with like averages. But as an individual, you are only dealing with yourself, right? So unfortunately, you are just left with, until we come up with better ways to do science when it comes to psychology, we're just left with just what we have, which is you're going to have to make decisions based on your own data, your own history, and do the best you can. And continue to read the research on psychology. I think this is still very helpful. You're going to find a lot, but also recognize that you're going to just have to do some science on your own. And science is not just limited to the lab. You can do science anywhere. Some of the best people I know are doing science outside of academia, and it's really nice because you don't have all the messed up incentives that you might have. I mean, you're still going to have messed up incentives from yourself. However, this is just a quick journey into how to apply science and Bayes to your own emotions and everything. And hopefully this will help you become a lot happier. Thanks. Let me know what you think in the comments. Or you can also go to my website, deliberatehappiness.com, where I have a whole bunch of other tidbits. Also, let me know what you think about using video versus writing stuff down. I really like talking, so if you find that you like it when I'm talking as opposed to writing, great. And then if not, I can always return back to writing. Thanks, and yeah, happy sciencing.